So yes, now we are exactly at 10, so we could start this session. Welcome everyone to the second session in the Nils Klim Webinar Series. I would like to especially welcome our guest speaker, Otso Kortekangas from Akademi University and the University of Helsinki. Our today's topic is education's paradox and the state-Sámi relations in the Nordics, historical injustices and the path to reconciliation. And before I further introduce our today's speaker and myself, there are some practicalities to be shared. Firstly, this session and the webinar series is organized together by the Nils Klim Prize and the ERC-funded research project From the Marchings to the Center, Rights Development, Transitional Justice and Indigeneity in the Nordics, MARCEN short. And the webinar is recorded and it will be published online, maybe later this week in the MARCEN website. There may be time for a few questions from the audience, and questions can be asked via the chat. And let's just remind us all that when asking questions, please be mindful of and respectful of others. So without further ado, I'm really glad to present our today's speaker, Otso Kortekangas, who is a Finnish docent and researcher specializing in Arctic history, educational history, and the history and ethics of environmental history. He has contributed to discussions on Sámi history and educational policies in the Nordic countries as a part of a research project, TRINK, Truth and Reconciliation in the Nordic Countries, by the Danish Institute for International Studies. He has co-authored Forgotten Responsibilities, Nordic Truth Commissions, Sámi History, and the Difficulty of Transnational Perspectives on Historical Responsibility. And myself, I will be your host today. My name is Roosa Helenius. I am a Finnish doctoral researcher and working in the MARCEN project, and the focus of my PhD will be on the history of Sámi educational legislation and policy. So now we could start the discussion. And firstly, I would like to ask you, Otso, given that we both are non-Sámi and Finnish scholars, how have the ethical considerations and researchers' positionality affected the way you have conducted research regarding the Sámi as a non-Sámi scholar?
Thank you. That's a great question. Thanks for the kind introduction as well. I'm happy to be here and talk to you today. Thanks so much. Yes, indeed, I am. I'm something of a norm person in this country. I guess I grew up in Espoo in the Helsinki region as a Finnish speaking male. And so I have even if I have sort of also quite a lot of Swedish in my daily life nowadays, and also some Sami actually. My background is very sort of norm Finnish, so that's indeed very important to state in the beginning already. When I started doing research on the Sami, I was a young PhD student in Stockholm actually, where I conducted my PhD research or finished my thesis, and my interest toward Sami history was something of maybe not coincidence, but it was fueled or born in a context where I was an exchange student in Peru and studied the sociology and societal history of Latin America, and then sort of got this perhaps a somewhat already classic realization that oh, we have something similar back home that I don't know anything about. So I sort of imported that theoretical knowledge and thematic to the Nordic context. And then my interest towards Sami culture as such has of course grown and increased, and knowledge has increased on the road here. But to answer your question, I think we just need to be very humble, cooperate, a lot with Sami scholars, read a lot of Sami scholarship and indigenous scholarship, and refer actively to Sami scholarship. When I started, it was well, the body of Sami research literature wasn't as big as it is nowadays, and we were only a few researchers in the Nordic countries actually studying Sami history. So it has grown a lot, which is of course very good. But we didn't have, or I didn't have, very clear ethical guidelines when I started, because the great sort of excellent, useful guides that we have nowadays published for ethical Sami research weren't available at the time. So I sort of learned by doing and by discussing with other researchers. So yeah, humility, just be humble and ask people. And nowadays, of course, you can use the excellent guidelines that are available through Sami parliaments and through Sami research institutions. Then, yeah, I already mentioned cooperation with Sami scholars, which is a good way, of course, to get insights and get to know sort of the context better. And of course, there is a point of discussing this issue, and there is a point of making the statement that perhaps, or I believe that Sami scholars should sort of be leading in the process of producing new knowledge. But I also think that it's good if we are also others, and the sort of group of researchers is as large as possible, because then you can produce more knowledge and research and information. And then there's also this sort of the different contexts a little bit of Sami history that are interesting, because nowadays it's very sort of paradigmatic to frame the Sami as an indigenous group, which is of course good, and I have nothing against that, quite the contrary. But also it is in parallel important to not to sort of exotify, or to realize that the Sami are also and sort of integral part of Nordic history, and have always been so for millennia. So in this part, especially of Nordic history, I think we others as well have a lot to give to the discussion and the research. So this balancing act between acknowledging that of course the Sami are in a way something else than just the Nordic population, because of the indigenous history, and that sets them apart a little bit in different ways, but at the same time to avoid that kind of exclusion, an idea that it's something completely different from Nordic context otherwise, because that's not true either. Then, if I may continue for a short while still on this,
sure.
Because it was quite interesting when I was living in Sweden for almost a decade and working in there, and then sort of visiting Sami conferences or Sami research center and so on, and it was interesting to see, talking about the positionality of a researcher, that my position is actually a little bit different in Sweden, because I was sort of, I'm not a norm person in Sweden, because I'm a Finnish speaker, and there's a very sort of long history of Finnish speakers in Sweden as well. So I found myself often actually sort of position in that minority position where the Sami also find themselves often. So that was very enlightening for me to see that perspective. So I really felt that I was a bit of a different researcher actually as a Finnish speaker in Sweden doing research on the Sami than I am as a norm Finn doing research here. So it's also very interesting and enlightening for a researcher to see those positions and how they shift and change.
Definitely. Thank you so much also for contributing on your background. And also, I think it's really interesting what you just elaborated on, being in different positions while doing research in Sweden. Then if we could go deeper into today's topic, as previous research and also the TRC reports of Norway and Finland have shown, education has been one of the main means of assimilating the Sami into the majority populations in the Nordic settler states, especially between this rather long time period of to 1850s to 1970s. Can this sort of nationalistic or even one language, one nation ideology be tied into some wider historical developments or trends during this pretty long time period? If you can contribute some of that.
Yes, thank you so much. And yeah, I'm a historian, so this could be the whole day seminar just discussing this topic. But I try to keep it short. But yes,
Yeah.
yes, definitely it can be tied to sort of the societal context as a whole. And if I begin with Norway, then you as you might know Finland, sorry, Norway was a part of uh, Denmark for a long time, or in union with Denmark, whichever way you wanna sort of frame that. But in either case, when Norway then changed uh, from or shifted from being a part of Denmark to being a more or less autonomous part of the Swedish Norwegian Union, a strong nationalist ideology took over in Norway, and there was a sort of very strong nation building project in Norway in the 19th century and early 20th centuries. And that I won't go into that history more here, but that had the sort of effect that the Sami were sort of um, in parts targeted and also sidelined by this nationalistic ideology. But in schools, the main sort of norm and the goal of education became to be Norwegianization, fornorsking in Norwegian, which targeted both the Sami and the Kven-speaking minorities, so the Finnish or Finnic-speaking minority in the north of Norway. Uh, and there was this idea that since Norway was a sort of progressive nation to be built, so why would you opt out from that? Why wouldn't you want to be Norwegian and speak Norwegian and be a part of this sort of progressive modernist nation building project? So there was no room for Sami language in that context, which led to these strong assimilation policies. To put it very sort of shortly and simplify quite a lot, but that's sort of the main context in Norway. And then if you look at Sweden, which didn't have a sort of identity problem as Norway and later Finland had, was a kingdom that had a very long independent history, and Sweden sort of there were different ideologies in Sweden as well, but one is has been discussed quite a lot in some research is race biology, of course, and how the Sami group was one of the groups that got targeted within race biology projects and an ideology as sort of something to be kept pure and segregated from the rest of the Swedes. And at the same time, there was a very strong national economic push and ideology in the north of Sweden, where this sort of land of the future was to be made productive for the whole of Sweden. And in that context, Sami reindeer herding as a livelihood had an important role, where Swedish educational authorities sort of thought that this group of Sami reindeer herders could, when kept sort of pure as a race, but at the same time modernized through Swedish sort of know-how in some sense, could contribute to the national economy of Sweden by turning these high scandies in the mountain areas productive with their reindeer herding. That was to be then a combination of traditional methods and then a modernization that was instilled by the Swedes. So this created a whole different school system for the reindeer herding Sami in Sweden called the Nomadskolan, where the Sami kids then, the reindeer herding Sami children, were to be educated to be sort of efficient and good reindeer herders, but in Swedish, because Swedish was the language of modernism. That's what that was to bring about this change and development of the livelihood. So this is again very simplified and short the context in Sweden. Then if you go to Finland, you see that Finland became an independent country in 1917, having been a part of Sweden for centuries and then a part of the Russian Empire for 100 years. And a bit like in Norway, Finland also had to sort of reinvent itself as a country, or even invent itself as a country. And then education became to be one of the main sort of measures and tools for creating this nationhood and notion of nationhood. But Finland lacked resources as a quite poor country in the early 20th century, so the governmental educational system didn't expand to the Sami areas in the first decades of the 20th century. So in these areas, old church-run schools were still active, and those schools actually used Sami in many cases. So because of the lack of resources for education in Finland, Sami language actually survived for a longer time in Finland within the old church educational system. And when then the sort of standard Finnish educational system expanded to the Sami areas, then language assimilation happened in most cases. There were some exceptions there, but mostly the same as in Norway. Yes, this was super short introduction to the historical context.
Thank you so much. And I think we could, as you said, we could discuss only about this question the whole hour. But just to sort of conclude, so maybe this global idea, or at least in the global north, this modernization and also making everything effective, where maybe some drives in these sort of nationalistic processes and also then the assimilative processes.
Yeah, I could say if I just can add something, because
Yeah,
I always would like to add that of course these educational projects had the sort of unintended side effect that many Sami then actually got an education and could then participate in the public sphere of Norway especially, and also Sweden and Finland if we talk about the early 20th century. And this led to a strong opposition and a discussion, critical debate about these educational policies that then later on actually formed a very important base for the later movements, including indigenous and minority movements of the latter part of the 20th century. So this is also something that needs to be stated also always when we talk about education, that it had this double effects, assimilation, but also empowerment in some sense. And the Sami
definitely.
actively used that actually very, very strategically, the education they had and the position they had to criticize and try to alter the governmental policies.
Definitely. That's a really good point. And actually, we already touched upon the sort of what role did language policies or school curricula play in shaping Sami identities. And if you could share a bit more about how have historical educational practices contributed to the challenges of maybe preserving Sami languages today. You already mentioned that in Finland, that because there was this catechist education form led by the church for a long time, and they used Sami. Maybe the situation in Finnish side of Sápmi was maybe at least in the start maybe better, or
Yeah, yeah, well, yes, exactly. So yeah, so in Finland that contributed to possibly I can sort of say if that's what kind of effect that has if we look at the situation today. But there was a stronger Sami language had a stronger position in the first half of the 20th century in Finland, and in Norway, of course, the curriculum was very much Norwegian, and in Norwegian and Sami language was only used as an auxiliary of the assimilation, so it could be used to Norwegianize the pupils. So to teach them Norwegian in the beginning, you could use some Sami, but then when the pupils knew enough Norwegian, then you could sort of skip the Sami language altogether. And that of course led to Norwegianization in many cases, so loss of language. But as I already said, that also the assimilation policy was most rigid and most formalized in Norway, but so was the opposition against against it. So it sort of led to this strong opposition, where it was maybe also because of the fact that the language policy was so strong, it was easy to target it and criticize it. Whereas if it was a little bit more sort of uh, what's the right word for that? But not sort of formalized or clear, as it was in Sweden and also in Finland in some sense. Maybe also the opposition against that policy was more difficult to organize. So that's one thing. Then yeah, maybe I stop there for now.
Yeah, yeah, thank you so much. And I think it's really important that you bring to the discussion the opposition and especially active Sámi civil society and active Sámi uh, individuals or groups opposing these assimilation strategies. And maybe quickly also, I think it's interesting and also somewhat, well, it's troubling that a Norwegianization of Norwegian, wasn't it so that one of the agendas behind this, also this nationalistic build sort of image building, but also security policy interests. Do you know if there were similar interests in Finland or Sweden at the time?
Yes, that's a good question again. And yes, so in Norway uh, it was called then finske fare, so the Finnish menace or danger, which was mainly it was seen as a threat from the Finnish speaking or the Kven speaking minority, because the idea was that or the fear was that the Finnish nationalism could spread to these groups, which wasn't completely untrue either, because Finland actually some circles in Finland had these nationalistic ideas of expanding Finland also geographically to the areas where Finnish was spoken. So there was this idea, and it sort of spilled over to the Sami, because these two groups, the Sami and the Kven were often sort of grouped together, even though it needs to be stated. And now I'm speaking about Norway, but there was a certain difference in the rhetoric of the educational authorities, where the Sami were seen a little bit more as a as a domestic minority, whereas the Kvens were seen as immigrants. But in either case, this assimilation policy targeted both groups. So that's sort of the Norwegian context. And in Sweden, yes, the same thing happened. It wasn't perhaps as strong, but again, in Sweden, the security politic argument also affected more the assimilation policy of the Finnish-speaking minority in northern Sweden, which was like there was a heavy formalized assimilation policy in those regions, whereas the Sami were a little bit outside of that. This sort of division or distinction between domestic and non-domestic minorities was even stronger in Sweden. Excuse me, where the Sami were seen as an old Swedish sort of population, and the Finnish speakers were seen as an immigrant minority that needed to be assimilated. And in some cases also there was an idea that the Finnish speakers in northern Sweden were Swedes that had accidentally sort of switched language to Finnish at some point, and now they needed to be re-Swedified in some sense. But there was definitely an element of that fear of the Finnish nationalism spreading as well. In Finland, the situation was a bit, well, quite different, since there was no sort of course, no Finnish minority in northern Finland. But there was some ideas about sort of as the Sami, a non-Finnish speaking population, posing a threat in the sort of the border area. So there was that kind of idea in Finland as well, but it wasn't as strong as a discourse.
Thank you so much for this historical overview. Then if we move towards to the present day, The Nordic settler states tend to have this image of being exceptional in terms of education, like the educational systems being one of the best in the world, or in other case, not being involved in colonialism, and that would make the settler states exceptional. How do you find, to what extent does the idea of this Nordic educational and social exceptionalism depend on silencing of histories of Sami assimilation or Sami histories in general?
Yes, so in many ways, I would like to say something about the term settler state itself, because Eva Josefsson, who was a speaker for last seminar in this series, also commented on it, and maybe I don't need to comment it that much, but I mean, there's of course, as a historian, I think that the idea of the notion, the concept of settler state definitely can be used in the Sami context, but we should also be aware that it has a sort of its own theoretical baggage that it comes with, and it's an import from another linguistic context to the Nordic context. So I mean, it can be definitely used, but we should be a little bit wary of mindful of the sort of limitations that it might have. And I always like to refer to Veli-Pekka Lehtola, who's a professor of Sami culture in Finland, a Sami Finnish scholar who wrote something like this, that to state that there was no colonialism involved in the relationship between the Nordic states and the Sami is a lie, and it's an exaggeration. But it is also an exaggeration to state that everything that happened was colonialism, or should be interpreted in colonial terms. And why I say this is only to highlight that there was also cooperation and intermarriage and stuff like that. It's a good thing to have sort of have in mind that it's a complex history, mainly just to uplift the role of the Sami actually, and not victimize them.
That's a really
yeah,
good point. Thank
yeah.
you for sharing that, and it's really great that you refer to Veli-Pekka Lehtola. And yes, we should be always sort of mindful and realize, as you said, what kind of baggage these terms might have.
Yeah. And then I'll try to remember the question you
Yeah.
posed. Yeah, silence. Okay, silencing of Sami. Yeah. So yeah, that's an excellent question, and maybe just sort of in terms of um, history and historical culture, and who we think we are as countries and as a region. I think it's very interesting to look at some of the recent research results pointing to the fact that there has been or have been Sami communities living in very central parts of Sweden and Norway and Finland as well, really quite recently. So up until like the 17th century, you can see settlements in the Mälardalen Valley in pretty close to Stockholm, and also in southern Norway. And we have Sami place names all over in Finland as well, in southern Finland. Nuuksio, for instance, a national park
Yeah.
close to Helsinki. Um, so I think it's interesting to think about why have we forgotten about this history collectively and as countries. And of course, their education has played a big role. So when we have constructed ourselves as nations and as region, so Sami history has been almost completely sidelined, and up until today, actually, if you look at there's some differences between the countries, but if you look at, let's say, Finnish school textbooks in history, there's still very little written about the Sami, and if there is, it's a side note or something like a fact box or something. So it's not included sort of in the general narrative of us as a nation, as a country. So that's one thing, and their education has, of course, has a big role in this exclusion. Then yeah, of course, about the sort of exceptionality, idea. Yeah, so it's as we all know, Nordic countries have been quite eager to at least before, maybe not today actually, but at least before being quite eager to criticize either context of oppression and dominance, uh, and then sort of turning a blind eye to the Sami minority and other minorities as well in the countries. So this is a process also in education to admit what has been happening here has been quite slow and met a lot of opposition. Uh, and up until today, it's lack in the educational systems. It's a very nice example from 1920 where a Swedish teacher, Sami teacher called Karin Stenberg actually criticized Sweden exactly for this, for criticizing for instance, UK for colonizing Ireland and India, but not sort of realizing that the same is happening in the Sami area. So this is a very early example where she's actually using the term colonialism as well. So I always like to bring that up. Karin Stenberg in 1920. So this is still still unfortunately true, I think. So that'd be my answer. Yeah.
Thank you so much. And I think it's, as you said, it's really interesting that Karin Stenberg was already 100 years ago criticizing Sweden for the similar sort of positions between Sami and Sweden, and also this exceptionality that, and we can now look at how much progress has happened or similar discussions are still being discussed. And also of the role of active Sami teachers, active Sami individuals criticizing these policies.
Yeah.
We already discussed, or you mentioned, the really appalling lack of knowledge that there is in history books or in general in sort of Finnish or Swedish or Norwegian sort of majority populations education about Sami and about the Sami history or culture. So how would you say, how can the history of Sami education inform current efforts towards reconciliation? And sort of what lessons does it offer for addressing the lasting impacts of assimilation?
Yeah,
That's a big question, but
yeah, it's a big question. It's a good question as well. So I wrote this in the research anthology or research collection of the Swedish Truth Commission on the Sami. They published a collection of texts recently in March, where a group of researchers wrote about different historical injustices and themes. And I wrote an article there about language policy in the early 20th century, partly based on my dissertation from almost 10 years ago, but also with some new sources. And I was also, there's sort of this idea, or this idea is thrown around, or sort of reiterated quite a lot in Sweden that it was prohibited to use Sami in the normal schools in education, and I wanted to look whether that was actually true and what the different levels of documents said about that, and it's clear that there was or what I sort of found was that there's no sort of clear prohibition to use Sami, but then it was never prioritized either. So what de facto happened was that the language used in the schools was mostly Swedish. But in some cases, I could find that Sami teachers actually used Sami, and Sami parents were complaining that Sami was not used, and Sami parents were complaining that it was ridiculous that the Sami kids would need to go to the schools that were formed like these kvartti tents, like because they were supposed to be very Sami. But then and were forced to use Sami traditional clothes, even if they wouldn't always want to. But education was in Swedish, so there was this criticism from Sami parents. This is ridiculous that we should instead have education in Sami and let the kids be kids as they want to be, and go to maybe school buildings that are in some cases more healthy than these idealized tents that the educational authorities were building. And what I want to say with this is that to inform today's policies. Maybe I would like just to find inspiration in those sort of cracks in the discourse and see that there was this criticism all the time, and there were these people who actually navigated the system and managed to use Sami and keep Sami alive, even in very, very sort of dire circumstances. So the situation is a bit better today. So maybe we have a better base to just to establish an education that's more equal and also uses more Sami. And one sort of interesting example is I think it's in Pasila in Helsinki, a school that is actually having bilingual teaching in North Sami and Finnish, because one problem now facing Sami language and Sami communities is that many, if not most, Sami reside outside of the traditional Sami home areas in the north of Scandinavia and Finland. And the Sami have territorial rights in the Nordic countries mainly, so they have the right to education in their language, in their first language or mother tongue, what you want to call it, in this area, this Sami home area. But when you reside outside of that area, the same rights don't apply anymore. So then there's this one solution is to just to establish schools even if they are outside of the traditional home area and the administrative area. But then of course it needs to be it's sort of dependent of political will or goodwill even of the places of the cities and the municipalities. So that's one thing, I guess. Then in general, of course, this is a very sort of generic and general point, but of course, to learn about something that has happened that has been negative and detrimental and terrible, of course, should inform us to create better educational systems. So that's just like idealistic, generic and general point. But of course, in these ERC processes, then education and cultural politics is one thing, and even if it will definitely also be difficult and hard to sort of follow some of these recommendations that the TRCs have had in this field, it's even harder when we talk about land rights and sort of so-called hard rights. So that's also something that we should follow and see that education and cultural policy is not used sort of to sugarcoat and to show that, yeah, we did this and this from the government, and then not touch the sort of more difficult issues.
Definitely. There are actually many points that I would like to quickly touch upon. Firstly, this, what you just said about the hard rights and the soft rights and the sort of culturalization way of making policy, especially, well, I know the Finnish context best at this point, but as you said, only, promoting cultural rights or language or education, but then not actually having any kind of sort of bettering of the situation in regards to land rights. And then if we look at the Sami culture or the Sami sort of, you cannot maybe separate the language or the culture from the land. So they are really intertwined. So I think it's also a pretty interesting question. Is it even possible to only, promote these soft rights? Is it really is that really promoting the constitutional rights maybe the Sami have, or because culture is land? So and then secondly, you mentioned the example from Pasila. Yeah, I think that at least a few years back there was this opportunity that Sami children could take education already from the early childhood education and then move on to the elementary school. But again, there's this sort of that it was only in northern Sami, and there was no opportunity to have this education in Aanar Sami or Skolt Sami. So, but still, it's really good that there is this educational possibility. But and also what you said that that it's a really problematic that the rights educational rights only apply in the territorial area, so the Sámi homeland area. And if the reality is that most of the Sámi pupils would be living outside of that. And it really comes down to the political will. Yes, maybe then I could. This is actually the last question I have written down, and we have still ample time, so you can take your time answering this, or then we can go to some previous themes. I think we already discussed this, but if you want to add something to what is education's role in the structural lack of knowledge of Sámi people among majority populations in history and for the future. We already discussed how there is a lack of information in educational materials for majority populations. And also, do you think that education is an effective tool for reconciliation? Also, really big questions, but
Yeah, so thank you. Yeah, I sort of answered the first part maybe
yeah,
already a little bit. So um, if I think about like education as a tool for for reconciliation, that's really a big and interesting question as well. And if we look back at how education has been framed since the early 20th century, at least, as a sort of a fix for all kinds of social and societal problems, uh, and that sort of discourse has been criticized quite a lot more recently. Uh, and if then we think about more recent sort of project of global citizenship education or democracy education or education about human rights or education about sustainability and so on, there we don't see sort of there's no linear automatic process where more information through education would lead to sort of more, how to put it, tolerant or liberal attitudes. But actually, almost the contrary has happened, that our Western societies at least have grown more conservative recently, even if we have sort of added the amount of contents that were supposed to sort of move the discourse to a different direction, to a more tolerant direction. So this is a huge question and huge challenge as well, where perhaps we need to rethink a little bit education as a tool, and not sort of think that only adding and increasing the amount of and contents of education would automatically lead to something. And also there's research pointing to the fact that to giving all to sort of ready-made, ready thought out models to the pupils can also backfire. So we need to be aware of this context as well, to let the pupils sort of think for themselves on this context. So yeah, that's that's one thing. Then what's happening in Norway now is quite interesting. With there's this national competence center being formed to sort of carry out some of the recommendations of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, and there's a lot of sort of local, even grassroots processes, discussions ongoing. So maybe that's one way forward, to not do it, not make too sort of big and optimistic educational projects, but sort of keep it a bit more small scale. At least one solution could be that. And then again, of course, there is a lack of knowledge among the majority population, and that needs to be addressed as well. And the sort of whole idea of reconciliation, if you see where that concept comes from historically, it comes from societies where sort of the society as a whole, even if there were differing standpoints, sort of agree that there needs to be a process to go on, to continue existing as a society. But if you like ask someone in southern Finland or Sweden or Norway about these processes, they might be very positive toward Sami culture and Sami rights as such, but I doubt whether they would feel that I as a sort of Helsinki or Stockholm or Turku-based person would need this for myself and for my society to survive, if you see what I mean. So it's sort of it's been framed and it's taking place, the whole reconciliation thing is taking place as a much more regional process in the Nordic countries. So that's a challenge if you want to, if you would like to sort of bring along the whole population. So there of course education plays a role, but how to actually carry out this huge educational task is I don't have the I don't have a good answer to that.
Yeah, it's a really big issue, and also if we discuss like three different nation states and different political systems, as at least slightly different. So it's a lot to unpack. Would you like to elaborate quickly on you mentioned these grassroots sort of developments or active groups that are trying to maybe create local impact? Because I'm not aware of those. So
Yeah, well, I'm not an expert in that either. I just hear it from my colleagues in Norway.
mm,
But maybe this idea that uh, if you look at the recommendations of the Norwegian Commission, also the Finnish commissions, these are available online, by the way, if you're interested.
yeah,
Anyone out there. Uh, so so the critique could be that they're especially the Norwegian one is quite general about the recommendations. So that makes them the recommendations, of course, vulnerable for a criticism that what then what's actually going to happen. But this is a positive example that people are actually taking these notions and ideas and results of the processes and using them in their local context to create sort of more yes, local discussions with different parties there. There was something else I was gonna say that I forgot about now, but yeah, so
that's
that's the
fine.
idea. Yeah, and then there's of course the a bit parallel and also a bit older and longer process of reconciliation between the Lutheran churches and the Sami in Norway, Sweden, and Finland, and especially Norway, that has been taking place a bit earlier than the governmental processes, and those have been also a little bit more sort of less publicized, less public processes, and more sort of within closed groups and locally, and there's also something to be learned from those processes, I think, uh, going onward here.
Thank you. We have one question from the chat, so I will read it out. Do you think that the TRCs will affect current education policies in the Nordics, both Sami education and general history education? Or is there a risk that the TRCs are understood only as historical projects with limited present-day relevance?
Yes, that's a great question. I think that there is that risk definitely, and also there's a risk that the parties of the processes, I think, are afraid of that it becomes a sort of idea that okay, we did it now it's closed closed case and we can move on. Uh, but I hope that there will be changes in education, and I think there will be I think there will be some changes. So more contents on Sami history, for instance, in history textbooks. And then one challenge in the Sami regions is that whereas there is teaching material available in Sami languages, in many cases that is sort of translated material from Norwegian or Swedish or Finnish. And even if it's in Sami, it doesn't really reflect the life realities of the Sami in the Sami regions. But it's more like a sort of Finnish, let's say Finnish contents, but just in Sami language. So I hope there will also be more resources to produce Sami teaching materials. But of course, like the boring and sort of dull and a bit depressing answer to all this question is that it comes down to resources. Everything comes down to resources, and if you look at the political discourse today, it's like it's sort of hard to see where that extra money would come from, at least in Finland and Sweden. Norway perhaps has a little bit more resources to put also to these kinds of processes. So yes, I hope that it will affect education in various ways, but it remains to be seen if that is actually the case.
Definitely. And as you said, it all comes down to resources and budgeting and how much is allocated to these things and are they seen relevant in inside these nation states.
Yes.
I now encourage our participants. We have still approximately 10 minutes, so if you are wondering something that you would like to ask, yeah, actually, right now there came a question. Um, how do you see the role of teacher education and the role of Sami languages and culture? I had a look at the education policies from the perspective of deaf or hard of hearing students, and although there are national level policies, they do not translate to teacher education curricula. In Finland, the teacher education has a kind of key role in determining who is qualified teacher, and was also then thinking about our local minorities and their positions in teacher education. So I think, yeah, did you grasp the idea in the question?
Yeah. No, I think that's a key issue. That's really good question. And there's other researchers that I can't now think the name of those people, but there's some research into exactly this teacher education part. So yeah, I'm not an expert on that, but I think it's an absolutely a key place and venue to discuss these things, and add also the contents of Sami history and Sami society as a whole, in this context. So that's yeah, I agree, that this also there's a lack of Sami contents in these educational institutions, but I'm not the expert to sort of answer. So yeah, so I don't know exactly what the situation is today, but I would guess that it's not it's not very good when it comes to Sami history.
Yeah, definitely. And there's always the discussion like when you talk about Sami education or then, for instance, education for the Roma or Romani. So there are differences, but then maybe it comes down to indigenous rights and then sort of other national minority rights. And there
Yeah,
might be differences in those. I could maybe, if we go a bit back to the sort of historical developments, I would like to ask you, at least I have read that, at least in Finland, there was, well, this really strong social democratic idea that everyone needs to have like the same rights and equal amount of everything. How does that historically or even the present day, has it affected the way the nation states have been willing to give sort of different kind of rights to different kinds of people? And has it played a role in this educational history of Sami?
yeah, that's an excellent question as well. Yeah, so there has definitely been this idea of this good state narrative, uh, of the Nordic countries, that we don't need sort of anyone to come here and tell us what to do because we are good democratic states that have these rights in place. But of course, what's the problem with sort of egalitarian rights is that they leave little space for positive discrimination of of any kind. So there's definitely that issue that, if the sort of claim and call is that we should have these specific and special rights, then the government could always counter, yeah, no, because we are all equal and have the same egalitarian rights, and that has been the case. But of course, the what has been very successful is that the Sami movement has uh, joined and also actually helped to even create the indigenous political movement, and that movement then formalized in the United Nations and so on. Of course, has helped the Sami to sort of bypass the national level sometimes and sort of show that yeah, this is international legislation we need to follow. So that has been a successful strategy politically. That has sort of finally, in some sense, allowed Sami to counter that sort of egalitarian and standard answer from the governments.
Definitely, that's a really good point. Then we have one question more. It starts with thanks for the presentation. What would you say about the issue or conceptualization of indigenous knowledge in the context of your talk today? And what do you see international advocacy would help in the recognition of Sámi rights, or would it help?
Well, maybe I answered a little bit the last question just now, but I think yes, internet that's a good way to go to sort of or maybe unfortunately only way to go to sort of point to the international legislation and the global sort of indigenous rights and declarations, because the states are very especially when it comes to land rights and so on. It's a very long way to go to gain more rights. Of course, then there's the whole different discussion that actually your MARCEN project is probably going to do a lot of valuable research on what sort of the juridical part of it and how court cases have helped the Sami recently. But the first question there, yeah, so conceptualization and indigenous knowledge in the context of your talk today. Yeah, so I come and talk definitely from an outsider perspective in this sense. So I don't know, maybe I didn't refer that much to indigenous knowledge as such, but of course it's key and it's the center of everything that we need to take in and also disseminate to the majority population through education. But that's maybe something I didn't really sort of refer to a lot explicitly throughout this presentation. But yeah, I can only say it's central for understanding of Sami culture and livelihoods and way of life.
Definitely. And maybe to answer the international advocacy, also to add on, maybe as Otso was referring, the sort of wider global discussion on indigenous education or rights of indigenous peoples or the declaration of the rights of indigenous people have been sort of like these sort of support for also the Sami cause and the Sami rights and Sami educational rights. But of course, I think more information that would sort of be spread to a wider group of people would also support the sort of the knowledge that there are these Sami people and we have to promote the rights of Sami people.
Yeah. Like you said, maybe just about the indigenous knowledge still. That's something I was referring to with the teaching materials, that they need to be actually based on indigenous knowledge, based on Sami culture, and not only translated from Finnish or Swedish or Norwegian. So that's one sort of concrete point that I would like to make. So that's why it's so central to include and even make that sort of the principal idea and sort of the central content of education.
Definitely, that's a really good point. And as we now have to wrap up, I will just recommend this audience that if you are interested to further look into the sort of indigenous knowledge within Sami education, really good references have been written by, for instance, Pikka Keskitalo, Torger Olsen, of course, Otso Kortekangas from the historical perspective, and many more. Thank you so much, Otso, for coming here for the
Thank you.
session. It has been really interesting. And thank you so much for the audience. And if you have some further questions, you can send me an email so I can, if you have something you would like to still ask from Otso, I can then forward it to Otso.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So Have a really great rest of the week, and the next Nils Klim webinar session, I am now at loss which day it is, but you can check the MARCEN website and you can see when the next session will be, and also you can then see this session recorded later this week or next week from our website. So yeah, warm thanks to you, Otso.
Thank you so
And
much.
everyone.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.